You're listening to The Q Switch with your host, Spence.
Welcome one and all to the Q Switch Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Spence, and the mission of this show is to tackle subjects currently impacting ophthalmology and pull in leading eye care professionals and industry players to discuss their unique perspectives. So let's jump right in. In this episode, we bring in Steven Meyer. He is the Chief Information Officer at New York Ophthalmology, who will share his thoughts on the common struggles and solutions in scaling ophthalmic practice. Steven, thanks for hanging out with the Q Switch and making time for us. Where are you calling from?
I appreciate it. I'm calling from actually Bronx, New York at the moment. I'm in one of the practices here, and this practice actually sees, yesterday we saw 177 patients, over two MDs, and we did it with 6 technicians, including scribes.
To say you guys are efficient wouldn't be overstated, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, that is absolutely one of the primary things that we go for is efficiency and really watching our labor hours and automations.
Okay. So what expansion projects have you been a part of at New York Ophthalmology over the years?
So first, I met the original owner of this practice about 12 years ago now, and we headed up to this office actually. It was a completely blank space. I think it was an old Board of Education building, and huge space. And he goes, I think I want to open up a medical practice here. And that was my intro into medical. I was doing IT primarily and kind of installs, camera installs, stuff like that. So whatever I could get as side work. And then I was doing some CTO work for another company. So immediately it was blank space, and we kind of moved from there. So I've now opened 8 different practices from the ground up.
Okay.
That's not to count acquisitions or anything else like that. That's just, we move into a blank space and we say, let's make it happen from scratch.
The first nail being pounded, demo, all that.
Everything. Deciding
planning, blueprints,
your time between marketing and actually seeing patients, deciding on the best ways to go about and acquire new patients, how to build those relationships, how to eventually create marketing campaigns and things like that, which it's so funny because looking back to when we started, there are so many things in my mind. I'm like, oh, like, why did I do that? Or like, what were we thinking? Like, how did we even exist? And then, from, I just said 177 yesterday. I remember we threw a all-out celebration when we had 20 patients on the schedule for a day, let alone, not even seen.
Well, so it's not too far-fetched to say that you are a subject matter expert with the experience that you've had over the years with the different practices and PE and all that. But it is great meeting you and having you on the show. Let's start by having you share the origin story of New York Ophthalmology and maybe include the light bulb moment that put you on the path where you are today.
Yeah, so at the time I was working as the CTO of a rather large restaurant group in New York, and a mutual friend hooked me up with a gentleman by the name of Neil Patel, who is now deceased, but he wanted to open up a medical practice to service underserved populations.
And he was an ophthalmologist, right?
He was an ophthalmologist. He was a retinal specialist.
Okay.
But he did it all. I mean, the man was a sewing machine when it came to a salad bowl.
Okay.
I guess that's not the greatest analogy, but the guy's a madman. 4-minute cataract, 4-minute 30-second complex.
Beast, absolute beast. And this is how long ago?
12 years ago now. So
wow.
He was working privately, and he said, I just want to make a go of it. So he took out a rather large loan and drove up with him in his, beater car to this space, and he entered in, and we're looking at the neighborhood being like, we're a little lighter skinned for being here at the time. This part of the Bronx was not as gentrified as it is now. He's like, look, man, these people need help, and it's a prime place where we could locate, we could help these underserved people. Let's build something. So we get into the space, and I think both of our jaws kind of dropped when we realized how big it was. But then when we started looking at it with the insurance, the payer mix that's in this area, it's really a numbers game. We're not extracting huge dollar per patient, but if we could see the volume, the money's there to pay the bills and to set some aside. And that was kind of where we were going. And we all know that, ophthalmology, and I'd say most fields in general, have been a race to the bottom of late in terms of reimbursements. And everybody who comes out with a new way of doing surgery or a new doodad in an ASC, it's how much less time, how much easier it is, and therefore the insurance company goes, oh, so you don't need as much money. But
Right.
I digress with that. So we went in. First thing we did was we got a company to kind of draw out the space, which we stopped doing after we got into the space and started expanding. And we got a set of contractors to come in and help us build this original location. After that, it was a matter of, marketing, getting people in the door. And then once you start paying back those kind of rolling loans, you have more framework to acquire more money and therefore acquire more practices, which is what we went ahead and did. And it was kind of this role of we would get a space. We didn't really find things we'd like to acquire because most of the medical practices were physically small in terms of their area, the amount of lanes, things like that. We wanted larger practices for the lower income neighborhoods because we were also, our only real competition outside one or two people were the hospitals, where you can be waiting 5 hours.
And you need that space because, like you were saying earlier, if I'm tracking, that you have to see a ton of patients in order to, be solvent. And so you need a lot of space to be able to, for waiting rooms and lots of lanes so that people can move through quickly and for just ease of patient flow so people are on top of each other. So it makes total sense.
And so, we went in and eventually we stopped getting people to draw the plans and we would draw the plans ourselves. We would sit down and discuss, okay, here's what doesn't work in the Bronx. This flow should be better if we design the rooms like this, or if we take this space and manipulate it like this. And then it was, it started getting into the nitty gritty of like, rather than getting furniture installed, if we just get separate furniture, we could replace it every 5 years and not worry about tearing out walls and then spending, $30,000-$40,000 on furniture. So our lane prices went down from a furniture perspective alone.
Wow.
A lot of people, they go and they go to some sort of design studio that does something like this and works with your architect, and everything is beautiful. And I get that. And some practices really, truly, please do. But for the most part, what you really need is you need the flexibility to adapt to change, a change in your population, change in your payer mix, change in the, you don't know the longevity of this thing. You know how expensive it is to fix a sliding drawer on a permanently installed cabinet? Like, it's crazy. So it's things like that we started learning, these little lessons that started adding up to bigger things.
So it's more of like an evolution, almost a test and learn. And over the course of time, you're able to really control and manipulate all aspects of this and really pivot and adjust on the fly, or as you see opportunities come up to really be more efficient, scale efficiently, save money, and also at the end of the day, serve these patients who really need that.
Correct. Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct.
So, well, thanks for sharing that. So many ophthalmic practices today aspire to scale their operations by strategically adding sister locations or satellites. As a chief information officer and I guess operations guy, you have a unique perspective on the common struggles and solutions that when taking on such mammoth projects like this. I mean, you spoke to it at great length. So first, let's discuss some of those challenges. Speaking to your experience mainly, or maybe observation, what are the top 3 major roadblocks that practices run into when trying to scale?
I think there's a couple of ways to look at this, and it really depends on where they're trying to scale from. Is it scaling from 1 to 5, or is it scaling from 3 to 7, or so on,
or even 1 to 2? That could be. Also
1 to 2 is one of the hardest ones to do, actually.
Really? Okay.
The more you do, the easier it is. And I'll tell you why. Because at the end of the day, right, business's job is to make money. It's to make money to pay for the employees. It's to make money to pay for the rent, to provide the service, to get the machines. Without making that money, you're done for. There's no repaying the loans. There's no anything. And I'm not talking about millions of side stuff. We're in underserved neighborhoods. We don't have that type of money. But what's really important here is when you have a practice, right? And you open those doors. If you haven't already been thinking about your marketing issues, that's a problem. So I'd say number one is not having a clear vision about what your market is and how you will fit in within your market. And I'll go a little bit deeper and then I'll move on to number two. So
Sure.
when you go in, number one, how many other ophthalmologists are in your area compared to your population size? Number two, what services are you offering? If you're surrounded by opticals, does it make any sense whatsoever to do anything other than, why are you doing glasses? Why are you doing refractions? Specialty contacts, sure, whatever. But like, you're essentially shooting yourself in the foot by taking away your referral sources. So you need to immediately identify who your referral sources are. Are there diabetic clinics out there? These sort of things, and then how you plan to hit them. So when I work with companies that are creating a new location, not acquiring, creating a new location, and expanding, I always say, like, have the marketing strategy in place and really understand it before really agreeing to sign any sort of lease or really even taking a look at a spot. That is one of the biggest things that I feel that get overlooked. And that's why you have doctors who open up a new practice and then they're like, I'm slow, I'm running out of money. Well, that's because we didn't focus on marketing from day one.
Taking that makes so much sense. I mean, I wouldn't even have thought of that, but it's what comes next. We built this. I mean, how they say it in Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. Not necessarily the case.
No,
if you
it really isn't.
It's not that way in this situation. You just can't just open a store, in this case, an ophthalmology practice, and expect people, the doors just to fly open, people rush in. It's not going to happen that way. Again, because of the environment around you, you have to know and understand it and be able to really fit within that environment so that you serve yourself and that community best. And your partners, like optical or OD referral sources, all those things kind of tie together. And if you put yourself in a wrong situation, you could open up and, again, fail quickly.
And you see it happen all the time. People,
Really?
I call it the PE cycle, where somebody works for PE and then they're like, I hate PE. And then they go out on their own and then they either get acquired by PE or they're just like, I can't take this headache anymore. And they go back.
That's funny.
So, it's the circle of life within PE. But yeah, so marketing and understanding your market and how you're going to acquire patients is the number one thing you should focus on before even thinking about what your space is and everything else like that. Okay, so number two, I would say number two is planning. When you go into a new location or your first location, you need to be comprehensive with everything you need for a working location. I personally use a rather large, I think there's like 600 or 700 items on it, cheat sheet.
Wow.
For instance, your tax IDs, your DBAs, your medical licenses, credentialing. Please, again, if you're opening up a practice and you call me and you say, hey, I just took over a lease, and I say, okay, have you, credentialed yet? And you say no, you screwed up. You need to start credentialing. Some of these places take forever. And I realize it's not like that in every part of the country, but you really want to get certain balls running, which is really important that you have a plan, have organization, and you rate it in terms of priority and then in terms of where you are in terms of progress. Right? Another thing, it will help you avoid pitfalls. Like, for instance, how's your only sink going to be in the kitchen and the bathroom? Watch your spectrum. I know it's funny, but like, okay, I'll give you a very real example. You have somebody who gets pregnant, right?
Okay.
Now they're breastfeeding. You're either blocking off your kitchen because you can't ask them to go to the bathroom. You're either blocking off your kitchen every time they pump, or you're in violation of law. You need a place with a sink that's not that. And it's not just for like the normal reasons. There are things you learn that are like, I really should have another place with a sink. And I know this is a very specific example, but it's crazy. This stuff happens. And then all of a sudden you're left without a lunchroom for, a couple of times a day. And then God forbid, somebody walks in because it's not locked. Bam, lawsuit.
Right.
So, we have stuff like that in your punch list. We have what kind of tests you've been plan on running, and kind of making sure that those machines are aligned with what you're going to do. Meaning, if like you may say, I don't really need a pentacam, but you're not going to say that if you're doing vision correction or if you're corneal.
Right.
Like, you really need a pentacam, or you may also have tests that you get it because you think you need it, but you don't actually need it. I'm trying to think of examples without being incredibly specific. Know your business, know your field, and know what machines reimburse you and what machines don't reimburse you.
Right, because those are additional revenue streams that could help, again, lift the practice and maintain some of those benchmarks that you want to attain on a regular basis to keep the lights on, pay the employees, pay for licensing and all that kind of stuff that you just spoke to. So accounting for that type of thing is critically important. I can see that.
100%. But all right, so 1 is marketing and patient acquisition. 2 is organization, creating a list for yourself and prioritizing it.
Planning.
Yeah, planning. Thank you. 3, I would have to say, is I'm kind of mixed on 3. 3 could be, we'll call it strategic relationships.
Okay,
right?
interesting.
Because,
more, please.
Yeah. So I would say having, and again, I'm a New Yorker, so some of these words may not make sense to people, but having
Speak freely.
killers. When you go to acquire, to get your first employee, are you getting a killer or not? Right? Your life will go so much better if you maybe even spend a little bit more money than you're comfortable with to get somebody who really knows what they're doing staff-wise and is willing to put in the work. And when you pay them right, and I'm not saying out ludicrously, but when you pay them right, you will have somebody who's equally invested in your practice doing well. This is a job.
You were right on, Steven, because I've been, in the corporate world for quite some time in sales, management, and I had to learn the hard way, but thankfully I learned quickly that hiring good people is extremely difficult. They're hard to find and they're not cheap. And once you come to terms with that and realize that investment is worth it long term, you don't hesitate at all when you find that one person like, oh my God, this person is a dream hire. And you nab them, you get them, and you align with them, and you treat them well. And oftentimes, you don't have to do a thing. Just give them their marching orders, and they execute. They are self-sustaining. You have to manage them. What I like to call high performance, low maintenance.
Yes.
Those folks, they are not a dime a dozen. They are few and far between, and they are not cheap, but they're worth every penny, as I mentioned.
And it's funny because we all do this thing, and I do mean like kind of everybody does this thing where we've all worked with somebody, or maybe it was even ourselves, but let's not be that way. We've all worked with somebody where we're like, damn, they let them go, or like either fired them or allowed them to leave. And you're like, that was dumb. Like, they were pulling so much weight. But then when you're a business owner, you're so worried about that dollar figure in your head that that whole thought process of like, remember that person that was amazing that they let go, and you were like, what an idiot. Now you're the idiot.
Yeah, you often find that one person was actually probably doing like the job of 4 people.
Exactly.
And to replace them, you have to actually hire 4 people, and spending more money, losing that expertise, that killer instinct, as you mentioned, and it just, and you end up going backwards, not forwards, because this person was making too much money, quote unquote, or what have you. And so I see that mistake made all the time. I've made it again in my career as a hiring manager.
Me too.
And it's regrettable. And so I try and, I've adapted and evolved. And when it comes to hiring people and building a team, that's one of my top priorities.
And the reason I said strategic relationships or partnership is, all right, so you have your employees, right? which are partnerships, they are relationships. So let's
Of course.
very, very clear, especially if you want to see high volume, all they have is team, because honestly, there's no way I could afford to pay them what they're worth. Like, I'll just be honest. So like, all I could do is create a tight-knit team and make sure that anybody who doesn't fit into that team isn't here. If they can't pull their weight, they're not here. But the other side of that is now you have, okay, you're starting out or you have one practice. Do you have a billing company or are you doing it in-house? And what is your relationship like with them, right? Are they going and having conversations with you, not like, oh, you made this much or that much, but like, hey, you want everybody invested in your practice as well as you can. And I kind of give it the 80% rule, meaning if somebody gives a hoot 80% as much as you do, you're in a really good place, right? So if they come to you and they say like, hey, I noticed, visual fields have dipped and that's, an additional $30 you could be tagging per patient or something like that, that's a great sign. But if they're just giving you kind of that dry interaction of like, hey, I just need a patient record, blah, 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 it's not really helping you become a business owner or manage your practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a huge problem with that in the billing side alone, especially when some of these places are taking like 6 to 9% of your revenue. I mean, what are we doing? So they take that, but they can't go over the ARs with you. They can't go over, how many first pass or multi passes you have and how to improve that, what notes need to be improved. It's just a very, I don't want to say transactional because that's not the right word, but it can't be like, hey, we just need this, we need this, we need this. They need to guide you and help you. And if they're not doing that, then it's not a relationship. It's not a partnership. It's just an outsourcing. And there are cheaper ways to outsource than a billing company. You could find one overseas that will do it for much less than the percentage that you're paying in the US, right?
So what I hear you saying is you want to build relationships, partnerships where folks are invested in I guess everyone being productive and successful, whether it's your external, like some of the billing folks, or internal on your own team. Yeah. Everyone takes ownership in being successful. And I think, correct me if agree with me or not, that really, I think, it comes down from the leadership, folks like yourself, some of the surgeons, other administrators, the stakeholders, really creating that environment and really making those relationships happen. At least that's how it's been for me.
Can I give a fourth?
Of course, yes.
All right.
Most certainly.
So I was just thinking, in terms of a fourth, when you have, sorry, I try and listen and not think about what I want to say. So sometimes I get a little bit caught up in my head.
Not a problem.
So the fourth is really, once you have a practice, right? Your practice most likely will be seat of the pants, meaning there's no real documentation. There's no real employee manuals, employee handbooks, learning paths. And you could get some stuff from ADP, but that really doesn't cover how to build your practice. So once you're in the mode of expansion and the acquisition, what you want to do is create the leanest, meanest system possible and document it. You want every practice running the same, because at a certain point, you have to cookie cutter. There's no way you can't. You have to move forward in a cookie. Otherwise, your expenses and everything else, your management, your reporting will be completely out of control. So coming up with proper documentation for building your, not a generic, but your streamlined practice, is incredibly important. And that will really help you move forward. And when you onboard people, give them, I built a Wikipedia. So we have a Wikipedia with videos and everything for every single position.
Wow, okay.
You do your job. End of story. For New York Ophthalmology, or for this company, or for this company, specifically for them. What we want to do is we want to make our acquisition costs as low as possible. And that means our downtime as low as possible. I want them getting up to speed on my EHR, my PM, whatever hot garbage I'm using for that. I won't get into that. Whatever automation softwares I use, whether I use a recall system, a texting system, a new phone system, I need all of that in place. And this kind of goes back to number two, which was your process, but you need to create process from a acquisition standpoint and a documentation on what works standpoint. And this will be your Bible. It is your practice Bible. And this is
Sounds
your
like
sauce.
So basically what you're saying is develop a blueprint that works for your practice that can be replicated and duplicated at the time should the opportunity present itself to expand to a satellite or sister location. Okay, I think that makes sense.
Also gives your guidelines for people to be within certain KPIs as well.
Sure.
So your KPIs should be in there. And again, you're not worried about KPIs when you're one practice and maybe even not two practices. Guarantee you 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 practices, you're going to start regretting not having done this sooner. Having to grab reports from all different things and everybody gives you a different report, it's unbearable. Standardization. There's a reason.
And that makes total sense because you don't want, if you have 7 practices, call it, you can't have each one dancing to the beat of its own drum. There's no continuity. And as a manager, a leader, administrator, you have to, really, it stretches you and your people. I think above all, the communication between all these different locations is muddled. And I think at the end of the day, the patients.
Yes, 100%.
So scaling a practice is never a cheap endeavor if you expect to do it right. What are the key financial considerations when deciding to scale an ophthalmic practice?
So glad you asked because I'm actually having a conversation with somebody right now about that. Okay. First off, you have your staffing costs, your per lane cost, and your testing equipment costs, right? And that's not having to do with like your building costs and your construction costs and everything else like that.
Sure.
So you need what I always say is like, okay, you have an idea roughly based off of your floor plan of what your equipment purchase is going to be and what your construction costs and rent and utilities are going to be. And that's just based off of your floor plan. Have staff, right? You ramp up staff as needed. Don't hire 3 people because you think you need to hire 3 people. You need runway. The stronger your marketing plan is, technically, I would be a little bit less conservative on the runway because I would expect it to work a little bit better. But I always tell people, pretend you're not going to see more than 20 patients a day for the first 8 months of your first practice.
8 months. Wow. Okay. So there's lean times to kind of get going. 8 months is a long time to not expect, because I think a lot of folks imagine, I'm going to be XYZ practice. It's me. I've been doing this for a while and I'm opening this practice in this great location. And you fling open the doors and everybody rushes in and, you're this, you are the crown jewel in that area for eye care. And you're saying it just doesn't happen like that typically.
It doesn't typically happen like that. Again, There are some exceptions where things can happen a little bit quicker. For instance, like laser vision correction. So non-medical. But medical is about establishing those referral networks and relationships. And oftentimes that does not happen overnight. And also, the reason I say 8 months, you don't know what you don't know. And no matter how many practices I open, I always run into something where I'm like, since when is this going to be an issue? Where did this come from? So when I say 8 months of runway, I mean, be conservative with the amount that you take out on loan and say to yourself, like, man, what happens if it takes me 8 months to start ramping up to the point where I'm like self-sufficient? I think a lot of people in their head say like, I took out the construction costs and I was working somewhere, and therefore when the people Google me for a cornea expert, they're going to show up at my door. That doesn't happen. It really doesn't. So I like to say the more runway you could give yourself, the better. And I realize 8 months is a little is fairly conservative, but I wouldn't worry if you told me that you had 8 months. I'd be like, great. So you experiencing this, especially on your own without external help, you have enough runway to make your own mistakes a little bit.
Sure. Give yourself some grace. Of course.
Correct. And it can be scary. And the last thing you want to do is like you're sitting in bed, not able to sleep, thinking like, what did I do? Why did I do
Right.
this? Maybe I should close. And then you come to work and you're not really in a good mood and you're projecting that onto other people because that's what humans do. And
Sure.
then the patients kind of feel like, why is this kind of miserable, to be here? And you take that superstar employee that now you're thinking, I paid too much, blah, blah, blah. And, that whole thing hurts you. So
It really seems like it just cascades and like has that the domino effect. It starts to affect everything around you. Totally see that happening. And when you talk about employees and employees project, the overall tone and tenor of that patient experience. And so, and if that, ends up going in the wrong direction, you lose patients and in a very short period of time, in a time where you're trying to build your patient base.
And then, when you're starting out, you're marketing. So like maybe you're open 3 days a week and you're marketing 2 half days a week, right? Or you're open 5 days a week and two of those days you're choosing half days and then you're going out to like opticals, diabetic clinics, PCPs, RNs, whoever, nurse NPs. And you're going out and you're saying like, hey, this is me. Here's a referral pad. Guys, have referral pads, have business cards, have like little tchotchkes. You don't need to spend a ton on it. Marketing material is important. So you go out and you say, yeah, here's me, blah, 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 blah. It's way harder to do that when you're hyper focused about money. And the fact is, if you allow yourself to kind of do this and have this great attitude and stuff like that, that is the quickest way to build. Nobody wants to deal with you if you kind of look a little bit miserable and stressed out.
Yep.
Not a good sign.
Yeah.
That's kind of why I pull out, I say like have 8 months of runway. Here's another thing. And I kind of briefly touched on it, but if you're leaving a practice to come to a new practice and you are medical related, and the majority of the time people are more focused on geolocation as opposed to you personally. And I know we like to think like, oh, but they love me. They follow me to the moon and back. And that does, in reality, more often than not, that turns out to not be true.
Okay.
People don't go like, what's the best cornea doctor near me? They get a referral and they go where they're told. They're not actively seeking out their own cornea doctor or their own, like, a best retina doctor. No, you got hit in the eye, you have a retinal detachment, you go to your PCP or the emergency room and they slide you a slip that says, go see this doctor.
Right.
And that's why those relationships are so much more important than, this whole thing of like, I need AdWords for, glaucoma, blah, 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 blah. I mean, people aren't finding you that way, especially the audience that exists in this point in history. As we progress, that may drastically change, right? But when I was younger, computers, the internet definitely wasn't a thing when I was a young kid. I mean, there were BBS boards kind of, but like, going online, AOL, stuff like that didn't happen until I was older. Like for me, I consider myself still growing up with it. And so, yeah, I'm a heavier user, but like my dad doesn't go and Google, he may look for reviews when he's told to do it. And don't get me wrong, I think Google reviews and things like that are incredibly important, and you should push your patients to do that. But in terms of just raw, like AdWords and things like that, it's not like you put that out there and then all of a sudden volume comes to you. It doesn't build volume. It may get your name out there on the web, which is nice, but it doesn't build volume. And that kind of all goes back to volume has to be, to a large extent in a medical practice, organically built through relationships. Thus, the runway.
Well, I think that any practice that prescribes to patients looking for them based on their condition or, whether it's cataracts, retina, I think they're giving patients way too much credit because patients aren't that smart. In fact, they don't even care. They just want to they're first of all saying, shocked, I got glaucoma. What's that? And I'm supposed to go see this guy. And again, they're just so, I think, wrapped up in having this eye condition that they didn't have 10 years ago. They just want to get it solved and go to whoever, they were told to go to, as you mentioned earlier. So Switching gears once again, as an IT and operations guy, you deal heavily with all the behind the scenes aspects of a practice that make it run smoothly, that patients don't often see, but certainly feel, like network connectivity and EHR systems, for example. How do you balance investing in new technology and capital with maintaining profitability during growth?
It's all related. And, people ask, like, how kind of my director of IT, CTO, CIO, director of operations, all these titles I've had through the years, how they kind of mesh together. And the word is that my thought is always like, you can't have an efficient operation without leveraging technology. I think that with efficiency comes financial efficiency as well. So, you have an EHR and a PM, right? And that's just going to cost you money. And it doesn't technically make you money. I mean, it exists in order to facilitate the making of money, but it doesn't make you money itself. So what's important about that? Well, what's important about that is how quickly you can flow through it. What are the ways that you can connect with your patient? How do you recall your patient? How do you get them in? How do you get them captured and hooked on you on a regular schedule? Do you make it easier to communicate with them? So doing that increases patient retention and also increases the patient's view of your practice in their eyes. So financially, that's where that really helps, is how it allows you to flow through your practice, flow through your MIPS and things like that. And then B, how does it allow you to engage with your patients in order to ensure that they're returning on a scheduled timeline and that you are maximizing the profitability of the testing that you're doing.
I see.
EHR and PM over there. Now we get into stuff like phone systems, things like that. What I try and do is I try not to duplicate everything. Luckily, my background is IT. So I have I have multiple years of building out phone systems and things like that, which I could do on my own. And that's kind of what I do, is I just set up phone systems for that. But phone system is, look, if you're doing calls and your EHR and PM handle the patient texting, then really it's about how inexpensive can you get it reliably. And then the important thing here is the agents that answer the phone. Now you may have the front desk answering the phone, that's fine. But like where we are, we have agents, we have call center, everything else like that. We've tried outsourcing that. It was awful. It was an awful experience. And I'm sure there are good ones out there, but the fact is especially in neighborhoods in underserved neighborhoods, they want to feel like they're talking to one of their own. It's a big thing. And I may even be too small in thinking that everybody wants to talk to somebody who kind of has their sound and feel. And the last thing you want is, when you're frustrated because you have a medical issue, to be thinking about kind of translating in your brain, even if it's the same language, what that person has said. So having very clear communication with your patients is absolutely critical.
Not to cut you off there, but I want to share with you, as I have that thought. Down here in Florida, where I'm at, there's a large Haitian population, and that when the offices I've been to, practices I've visited, who have a population of that serve the Haitian community, they have staff throughout the practice that speak patois and Creole. And I mean, it's if you don't have somebody on staff, if you're serving that community that speaks the dialect or the language of patois or Creole, you can't effectively serve that patient at the best possible level to meet their needs. It's simply not going to happen. You can have it, especially if they don't have a relative who can translate. And so it's critically important to have some of these communications wide open, and like you said, people who identify and speak the same language, literally and figuratively speaking, as the community that you're serving. No matter if it's Haitians or what have you, I think it's important to be able to account for that in several aspects of the practice.
And and the reason I mention that is the phones cost what the phones cost, right? You could find phones for less than $15 a line. You could find, there's all sorts of pricing models and everything else like that. And honestly, I don't think it's helpful to get into that necessarily. But having good staff who know how to close an appointment, how to get somebody in is critical. You talk a lot with the back end PE guys and stuff like that. It's not necessarily about how to save the most money, but how to make the most money.
Sure.
In terms of like, if I am spending more money than maybe I should, but I am capturing large amounts of patients, those patients are very happy, that kind of intangible price works its way through the system. And that's really important to think about, right? Because you could look at utility costs as a fixed cost. You have a TV. Do you get cable TV? The free TV, freebie, Hulu, whatever it is, who cares about that stuff? It's not critical to your practice. Matter of fact, a lot of the nicer practices I work on, they don't even buy TVs. They buy waterfalls and like big pieces of art and stuff like that, because everybody's head is in their phones anyway. So then we get into, back to costs. What I like to say is, as much when you look around and you see somebody who does a sole job at a minimum wage, and I hate to be this person, but I'm going to, the question is, can you automate it? Is there software out there to automate it, especially as you start growing? So if you have 3 people working on authorizations and eligibility and stuff like that, time to start thinking, what are the AI software related options and things like that could automate this and take away my labor hours? Those are the things that you want to scale back as you start really expanding and growing, is those jobs that just kind of suck life out of you, $15 an hour at a time. Like those they suffer, especially if they're not patient facing. I really care about patient facing. I care about my patients. But when it comes to jobs that can be automated, I much rather automate them and then just have somebody who maybe is like a pseudo manager or like a leader of managing that software. And in AI for AI they call it a vibe coder, meaning somebody who just kind of manages what AI does coding wise. And that's kind of what I like, is somebody whose job is to ensure that those automated systems and everything do this properly for them.
It sounds like another added layer of efficiency. Anytime you run leaner, you're going to save costs. I mentioned capital a moment ago. How important is upgrading or expanding equipment like lasers, diagnostic tools, that type of infrastructure when scaling?
That is a really good question. So I like to, whenever we take a new piece of equipment, we do a couple of things with it. We rate it as how important is it to the business to function. Right? If it's a tertiary piece of equipment, like for instance, I'm just going to choose this at random. I know some doctors are going to get upset over this, but like a Tear Labs, I mean, I don't really need it. It doesn't really add that much to my bottom line. Like, I don't care if it's a little bit old and worn out, it doesn't really matter to me. The other thing is the reimbursement levels, right? How much have I made on it last year? How much am I making on it this year? Does this machine pay for itself? And if so, when is it paid off if I were to get a new one versus a used one? Right? So those are 2 really big things that we look at. The other thing we try and look at is this machine going to give a better quality of care? Which, and I don't know if you want to edit this out or whatever, but we were looking at DSLTs, right?
Oh yeah. It was Belkin that Alcon acquired, and I've seen it advertised at different high profile like thought leaders or whatever in ophthalmology. A lot of the premium practices. Yeah, I've seen it.
I mean,
it's the contactless SLT. That's all it does is that. Super expensive, but was really good.
And now it is pay per click. There is a pay per treat, they call it.
Did not know that. Yeah. Did not know that. Okay.
It is fairly inexpensive, however, and it is very efficient, and it is so fast. No more like, please don't move. Keep your foot here. It is very fast. So by the time somebody says ow and moves, it's done.
Wow.
Like,
Okay.
it is ridiculous. And, I know Dr. Radcliffe has given like a ton of talks on this and stuff like that. We started getting those and we had SLTs. They were working, but the patient experience got better. The reimbursement is still really freaking good on it. And it allows us to see more patients per day in terms of laser treatment. So squeezing the laser treatment in used to be a little bit longer of an appointment slot, and I need my appointment slots. And I know the workup wasn't as bad for it, and the testing, there's no real, you just work them up and get them in because I've already had the previous appointment. But once we do that, it's like, hey, get into the room. Okay, pressure, AR, vision, sit here. Okay, you're all done for the day. And I think it's like 1.5 seconds per eye or something like that, down from however long it takes the doctor to give that treatment. So for me, that is worth it. Even though, we are doing it does have the pay per patient. I keep calling it pay per click. I know they wouldn't like if I did that, but it's a great machine to have in terms of your internal efficiencies and being able to compact your schedule and kind of also in terms of pain. I mean, everybody kind of dreads getting lasered in the eye, right? Like if it was 1.5 seconds and it's done, you're like, who cares? And you have drops and everything, but for some people, it doesn't matter.
Compliance is an issue. Sometimes budget is when you got the drop thing happening.
Yeah. But so we have that. I also like to consider as a last point, how many of the machines do I really already have? Right? Like if this machine goes down, is it going to be a showstopper for my business? And that is really important. And unfortunately happens all the time with certain companies. Where, you'll go and you'll be like, okay, if this laser goes down or this, let's think of another good example. Oh, the OCT.
Oh,
like, can you imagine you have a day packed and let's say you're not a volume practice, but you have 40 patients on the books and you go in the morning and the OCT is like, what are you going to do for the day?
You're toast. It's day gone.
And even if you go and you do other tests and blah, 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 the reimbursement isn't the same. The patient quality of care isn't the same. And then, okay, so you get them back in anyway. And then the patient has an extra visit, which kind of works out. But then the patient's like, why am I coming here so often? So it doesn't work out in the end. A lot of this stuff is bound. So for OCTs, I don't want to mess with some beat OCT. I want, give me something new, give me something nice. Even for AB scans, we do enough AB scans. I want something new and nice. I don't want, the old LX with the CRT monitor in it that, that was rack mounted. I don't want that. I need those pieces of equipment for whoever my specialist is in that location on that day. I need it to work. I'd not be calling patients telling them oh, we got to reschedule. When? I don't know, maybe a week, because you have a kind of a crummy service contract, or a lot of these companies, they're fantastic sellers, not great servicers.
That's a common theme amongst a lot of industry, which I hope improves as customers start to really voice their dissatisfaction that you'll sell me something, but then when I need you to service it, repair it, what have you, you're non-existent. No one answers the phone, and it takes a week for people to get out to me, and it's a problem. I'd have to agree.
Yeah, and so we have that on equipment. For computers, buy some used computers. You could get refurbished computers from Amazon with a monitor for $400 with i7s, 256 gigs of RAM and 256 hard drive and 16 gigs of RAM. Just do it. Who cares? Don't spend your money there. Spend it on what makes you money and what the patient interacts with. That is the key here. Everything should be going towards that.
So one final thought, Steve. What's the one thing you wish ophthalmic practices understood about growth, and what one piece of advice would you give them? You dropped a ton of pearls so far, so I'm not sure if there's any left.
Yeah, no.
But if you had just one.
I'm trying to
Like,
decide on what level makes sense to say it on.
sure.
I think, look, the one practice game and the I want to stay at one practice game is doable by all means, but it is a, a rough life. If you are expanding and you are moving forward, don't be afraid to take out that credit. Don't be afraid to invest. All these things that what is it? Penny foolish, like it's
Penny wise, pound foolish.
penny wise, pound foolish. I think so. When you're going and you're moving forward and you kind of look at big companies, and I realize I'll use Amazon for an example, and I realize Amazon isn't the same. I realize that.
Mm-hmm.
The way they keep growing and creating more wealth within its stock and everything else like that is they do run at a negative, they don't actually make money. They lose money pretty consistently, but they
Mm-hmm.
grow and they take on new investments and they get into new things. And I kind of wish that a lot of these practices, they're so worried about, if you're so worried about the bottom dollar, you're stalling growth.
Ah,
And
okay. Well said.
I think that's really what I'm trying to say is when you're worried about the pennies, the dollars, then you're not able to grow because
Sure.
everything's a problem. If everything's a problem, then either nothing's a problem or like make it make sense to me, please. If it's your money, right? You're in a trajectory. All right. I love racing, right? I have raced motorcycles for a fair amount of my life, track days and actual racing. And one of the things you notice as you get more advanced is you're either on the throttle or on the brakes. You're never
Okay.
really coasting. You're never really halfway cracked open. You're either rolling on the throttle or you're applying the brakes. There's
Okay.
no real middle ground except for like very, very specific track configurations and everything else like that. And you'll notice
Mm-hmm.
with watching F1 or NASCAR or MotoGP or whatever.
Sure.
And I think expansion is a lot like that. You're either on the gas or you're on the brakes. There's no like, let's take them out and see. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very hard to like stop and not start going backwards. So I think when you really want to grow, commit to growing. And
Sure.
if your vision is growth, then have somebody else who you trust or have a different department working on other things, but make sure that it's not in spite of your growth. It's to add and help your growth, not to take away from it.
Well, I got to say that's, I think, really strong advice from somebody who's been there and done that. And it was a great discussion, man, on the trials and tribulations of scaling ophthalmic practice. And you certainly brought the heat, my friend. So I appreciate that. Thanks for coming on to share your wisdom here on the Q-Switch podcast. I wish you and your team at New York Ophthalmology all the best. They are truly fortunate to have you. So, Steven, before we sign off, if any of our listeners wanted to connect with you to go deeper on this subject, where can they find you?
Well, you could connect with me on LinkedIn at Steven Meyer, and you'll see, New York Ophthalmology tagged to me. And right now, there's a picture of me petting a white tiger. And then also,
Classic.
you could email me, and I have a website. I'm currently in the middle of rebuilding it. Hopefully, it will be done by the time this airs. It's SMEYER at Fractal CT. That's FRACTALCTS.com.
Awesome. Well, we'd like to thank Riverside FM and Passionate Media for making this show possible. That's a wrap for this episode of the Q-Switch Conversations podcast. Until next time, this is Spence, and I'm out.
You're listening to the Q-Switch